Welcome to a walkthrough journey of CCWH. I am Reverend Mary Huber, a current pastor of the Community Chapel of Holistic Healing and president of the Community Center for Holistic Healing. This year, in May 2022, we are celebrating the milestones of our 45th anniversary. Our story will be viewed not only through my eyes, but with the input of various people who were or are part of the fellowship we enjoy. Here is a look back. CCWH, as we are most commonly known, was founded in 1977 by Reverend Michelle Luson, a mystic and channel for the multidimensional spiritual consciousness. Michelle and her identical twin sister, Dottie, were born to a Philadelphia mainline physician and an Austrian princess. Her royal ancestry has been verified and acknowledged by a European Royal Society who keeps track of the formal lineage of all royals. Michelle's mystical experiences began as a child when she was attending a Catholic boarding school. Her apparitions both alarmed and angered the nuns, and she was often punished for reporting such events because they didn't believe her. However, she and her sister did manage to lead a normal childhood, and when attending a public high school, were popular twin cheerleaders for their football team. Michelle's active channeling really began after her children were in grade school. She lived most of her life in Virginia Beach, but when her apparition of Swami Sivananda appeared, she moved north to Reston because he had requested her to begin this organization and place it in the Washington, D.C. area. The formal incorporation of the American Metaphysical Society, which is our original name, was accomplished on May 19th, 1977. Michelle was told by her spiritual source that she was one of 10 souls who entered the earth around the same time to spread the ancient teachings and thereby aid in the higher plan to restore humanity to its original spiritual balance. This is the divine plan that has been unfolding since 1958. Now, the original name of our organization was changed after a few years to the Community Center for Holistic Healing. Michelle had completed her mission by the end of the 1980s and has spent the balance of her life helping individuals through spiritual readings to aid them in their own evolvement and achieve their own reason for embodiment. Through her many teachings and workshops, and with the help of others who added their knowledge in specific spiritual and holistic areas, the community grew and prospered. Michelle's legacy lives on through each person she taught and each individual she aided with her advice. She does not claim this as a personal accomplishment, but gives all credit to God who works through her. Michelle went into retirement around 2005. She returned at that time to Virginia Beach and continued her work privately there.
Good morning to my loving friends and constituents, such as Mary, who continued the work that we began together. the purpose of the work, I want to remind you because it is so important. Individually, it's to become closer to our Creator so that we become a channel of inspiration, of healing, of teaching, and most of all, of knowing God and God's will for us, our community, and our world.
I am delighted to carry you along on this journey, seeing our growth through the amazing and unique trips we have taken. We are beginning in the Yucatan. Our purpose to go to the Yucatan was to fulfill an appointment made 12,000 years ago for this exact time in 1981, in November, during the time of the ancient harvest. 6 of the original souls coming from the ancient worlds of both Atlantis and Lemuria, who had settled and seeded the future civilizations of the Americas, were to reunite. 5 of these were remnants of Atlantis, and 1 was from Lemuria. These were the original bridge builders from the very ancient worlds. Along with them were 7 others who had significant embodiments later in the ancient Mayan civilization from the 6,000-year period. Altogether, they would open spiritual pods placed there during their own ancient travels, which would be meaningful in the upcoming new world of the future. These 13 were members of our organization, CCWH. The remaining 13 members who also went on this trip were there for energetic support. By higher design, we were sent to the Yucatan for this adventure and for the fulfillment of the destiny of these 13.
One of the sites we visited was Chichen Itza. I was quietly walking by myself past a structure known as the ossuary in Chichen Itza. I just had a sense of deep quiet and peace. I stopped in front of it and I had a sense of recognition of some kind. And my left arm raised up in a kind of a salutation, and this little prayer came to me. May love and light be with you. May you be free and blessed. May love and light be with you, and may you be at rest.
The primary structure we were to reach was the Temple of the Sun. So here we are, our group approaching to do that big ascent.
We all climbed up those steps. We observatory too, and we sat on that rooftop and saw some UFOs.
Yes, the topic of UFOs, especially at this site of the observatory, has long been documented in their history. The shell source told us that in those ancient days, the Space Brothers were ever close in the event that these people would lose their root in the physical. Well, you were, Gloria, you were one of the 6 the first Mayan Atlantean pioneers.
Well, I suppose There's so much I've been a part of.
The trip was so much more important and actually profound than anything we saw or did in the physical. We did meet our spiritual objectives to go to the Temple of the Sun and to visit the observatory, and in doing so, assured that the 13 individuals did indeed open the ancient pods of light energy created there 6,000 years ago by the priest, which are now benefiting our own present time of transition into a new era of human consciousness and understanding. And one final accomplishment was that it created a group of 26 people who were tourists into a spiritual community. And now, on to our next memorable journey. This is our sacred journey to Egypt. This was done in 1988. As with our trip to the Yucatan, this trip was delayed to be taken in a particular spiritual time frame. The request for this journey came through Michelle Luson's channel, which was a source named NIMO, pronounced Nemo. It is a cone of energy emanating from the sun behind the great central sun. It was explained first, the meaning and purpose of the Nemo cone. The name Nemo is but a symbol of identification of an ancient intelligence that was very important at a strategic point in time in human evolution. The letters comprising NIMO, N-I-M-O, is an acronym for New Intelligence in Medical Consciousness. The spirit leading this collective energy was always Dr. James La Follette. We received this information from the collective source about our journey. We are, and were then, former Egyptian initiates going back in time to the place of one of our most important previous lifetimes. Because of this source being comprised of many Atlantean souls, and even before that, souls from former root races, the building of 3 major ancient societies had been accomplished. These civilizations were Tibet, Egypt, and the South American Indians that inhabited Machu Picchu in its beginning stages. The purpose for these societies was to bring back clearly, with discernment and spiritual past knowledge, of the evolution of the human spirit made up of many souls, so that humanity could begin again there in those important places, uninhibited from the negativity that had created the destruction in ancient Atlantis. For this reason, you can see that the Nemo cone can be considered a source of higher intelligence that is dedicated first to the spiritual evolvement of all souls in the earth plane and to the transformational process, both individual and collective, for the healing and growth of all life forms on the planet itself. The higher reason for the trip was not to aggrandize any singular soul going, but rather to let each know that they represent one cell in the collective body of approximately 12,000 cells. Thus, they are important in the higher scheme of the evolving process. No individual on our journey was needing to decide what the ancient Egyptian root will give to the future of humankind, but they can believe and know that it was the first root put down in the physical by the remnants of ancient Atlantis, In other words, this is the initial group leaving Atlantis years prior to its self-destruction. And we were told that it therefore needed to be honored as a sacred place, a special time, and meaningful experience. In the collective consciousness, when you think of the lightening of humanity's density, certain ancient roots can claim more importance in their spiritual effect on earth than do others. Ancient Egypt, as a spiritual root, has the most physical effect on the planet, while ancient Tibet has the most spiritual effect on the planet and all of us. So in conclusion, the collective spiritual group guidance that we had then was quite pleased with the overall experience that we had, for there was a considerable amount of collective energy usable in the time, or for the time, when the collective Egyptian root would be closed. Now, I had a conversation with Michelle prior to going that one big reason we were on this trip was to close the spiritual root grounded there in Egypt for those many thousands of years. This energy vortex was being moved to another part of the world by higher design. And we were told at that time that we couldn't know from them where it was being placed, but we would have to discern that for ourselves. Let's go back to see how we started our plans for this journey. One of our CCWH members knew June Reichert, who owned a small New Age shop in Alexandria, Virginia, and who had been on many trips to Egypt. With her background, we assigned to her the coordination of our trip to Egypt. She used a travel agency by the name of Gateway. All of this became very relevant and symbolic when we look back at the trip. But here we are in the airport, waiting to board the long flight to our destination. We only had one stopover, and that was in Greece. We flew into the Athens airport and had a 5-hour overlay before our Egyptian air flight took us to Cairo. A wonderful opportunity to tour.
We saw all the ruins in Greece. Yes. At least much of them. We saw the Acropolis, the Parthenon, the Olympic Stadium, and the outdoor amphitheater. We even saw a section of the where the Oracle at Delphi has been.
We had a lovely modern hotel in Cairo and felt very at home there. Our 10-day journey was filled every day with new sights to see and much traveling within Egypt in order to see everything. Here we are at one of the older pyramids.
And that's the Djoser pyramid behind us.
Yeah, this
one of the early pyramids that was built. He was the jogging pharaoh.
Okay.
Yeah, he used to get up and run around, run around the thing that was being built.
And then there was the camel escapade. At some point, we were taken out a bit in the desert where there were hobbled a number of camels. Here, we found that the tourists could have the experience of being up on one and riding a few feet under the direction and the guidance of the camel driver. Even though the camel is kneeling, it's still a bit of a climb to get up there. And my goodness, when you're up there, it feels like you're on top of a 3-story building. Short time later, time to disembark, but you're still 3 stories up. The camel driver puts out his hand and says, "It will cost extra to get off." When we paid to get off, we had not understood that this was the arrangement. It was still quite fun, and I believe we would do it all over again. A great amount of time spent in Egypt was on a boat called the Nile Symphony, which traveled down the Nile, stopping at various important ports. The Nile in ancient Egyptian consciousness represented the tree of life of the combined spiritual and physical forces, similar to the nervous system combining Kundalini and life flow. Cairo was the gateway to the entering of the voyage, as it represented the thyroid system of the physical in the now. Since the thyroid is the regulator of all physical light forces, many on the trip received an initial send-off from their experience in either the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid or out at the ruins of the ancient city of Memphis. This started the internal triggering of each person's ancient root, whether or not they were consciously aware of this cosmic stimulation. So it was from there that the voyage began, with these different stops that represented, not necessarily in order, but in emphasis, the chakra system of the past. In 1989, the 25 members of the Community Center for Holistic Healing made a trip to Peru. We called it a pilgrimage. And this is an excerpt from channeling done by Reverend Michelle. This was to give us some sense of the past and our connection to it today and why we were going on the trip. And the source said, there were 3 ancient cultures over the past 6,000 years that melded into the present day Peruvian nation. These ancient societies blended Africans, Indians, and Asians into one people with a variety of beliefs and artistic expressions. Hence, the runes that you see today show only trace memories of the melding process, which then identify themselves as the lost nations of the Incas. This seems to have existed only for a 1,500-year period, but in truth, this existed for approximately 5,000 years, starting in 3,500 BC and ending about 400 years ago with the Spanish conquest. The first route was established by the remnants of Atlantis, who survived the floods and the earthquakes by becoming mountain dwellers. As the land settled and the floods receded, communication between tribes became well-defined through the breaking of language barriers and the building of roads. This evolution occurred by souls from Sirius coming into physical embodiment in that culture. These souls lay the foundation stones for language and science and became the way showers in astronomy, astrology, engineering, building, communication, or networking. This first period of redevelopment lasted less than 1,000 years because the souls that set it into motion were not truly familiar with the primal needs of the remnant peoples from ancient Atlantis. Therefore, they were not wise in diplomacy and supplying basic needs, and were insensitive to cultural and art expressions. So aggressive acts, rather than earth changes, broke up the continuity of that existing society and sent many of the remnant peoples into isolated communities, setting back progress for centuries. The second stage of Peruvian development is a stage that still mystifies archaeologists and explorers of today, for it shows that there are different roots in the present Peruvian consciousness, which reflects the philosophy and culture of other parts of the globe. This stage was also stimulated to grow by space souls incarnating. This period started around the beginning of the age of Aries, similar in time to the period of the great building of ancient Egypt and similar to a great building period in China. Transportation by sea and land came into existence through the help of the souls from Pleiades, both in embodiment and out of embodiment. Some even came in their spacecrafts to bring together in the Andes Mountains the ancient roots that combined both the Lemurian and Atlantean root races. This is the time of the designing of many cities, including what is now Machu Picchu and Cusco. Diplomacy flourished with trade and commerce and initiation schools, which included astronomy, astrology, medicine, language, and all forms of art depiction were present. Spiritual teachers traveled by land thousands of miles to contribute their philosophic viewpoints and their knowledge of ancient wisdom. In that way, the society was only known as the pre-Inca period was formed. How universal spirit manifested itself was similar to the spiritual essence incorporated into the ancient belief systems of the northern prehistoric American Indians, namely the Anasazi and the Mayans. The Mongolians and Aztecs were not developed in spiritual understanding to receive this space consciousness. This period is now known in history as the Chan period, which started in 2500 BC. The third stage is that which will be explored by the group going on this trip as the period of the Incas, with their spiritual head and their society reaching throughout most of what is now Peru and Chile, from the coast to the mountains, and then in the rainforest valleys. The Incas were a complex race, but they were a blend of many remnants of North and South American races and cultures. By that time, by blood and by their survival instincts. Thus, they had a strange mix of spirituality and primal human experience in their social order, meaning personification of deity as being part universal and part belonging to the earth, and the law of hierarchy existing as the law of the land. Kings, queens, priests, merchants, and ambassadors were considered upper caste. Farmers, producers of necessities such as fishermen, and all craftspersons were serfs. The only people that could blend the different levels of the caste system were astrologer, physicians, and army personnel. That was because these people could come from any caste depending on their talent. However, this showed an imbalance in the society, for it subdued the human spirit of many of its innate skills, such as the written language and art depiction, and caused power and passion to be sought after as symbols of personal freedom. This created an aggression and dominance by a few. It was easy, therefore, with the psychological impediment in the Inca society as a whole, for the Spanish to conquer it and merge themselves into its way of life. The missing piece in the societal substructure was freedom of the personal spirit. Consequently, it invited dominance. As the group went on their voyage, who were going on this trip from our CCWH group, they must pass through these time portals, recognizing that all that glitters in ancient history is not gold, but rather a step in the evolutionary process, be it a beginning or an ending one. The pilgrimage was to go to the core of the spiritual vortex that began the ancient remnant from Atlantis. For what it had offered as an energy fulcrum was an opportunity for the blending of two distinct natures, the spiritual and the physical, into one harmonious, peaceful, loving society. As the first stage from space disappeared, the second stage, which came from around the world, attempted to build, but did not have the ancient wisdom from the past. The third stage of the Incas' experience allowed pride and insecurity to revisit their consciousness, thus giving way to the destruction of their ancient roots. During the final Inca stage, the door was left open to the future Atlantean redeemers, which would be our group going, to eventually visit the ancient ruins in mass, to see the remnants of days past, so as to bring back to the world power, the United States, the consciousness that responsibility to the freedom of the human spirit is primary in all societies, or else there will be no lasting peace or spiritual nation existing in the earth, and humankind could again disappear without a trace. The synthesis from the trip that each pilgrim could expect to receive as theirs is a gift of responsibility to the global community as a whole in their personal personification of their spiritual and physical natures as one. And so it is, and so saith the collective source. With that grand sweeping insight of the deep background and history given by Spirit, as well as the immensity of the concept of our mission, I want to make it very clear that we also had quite an enjoyable journeying in Peru. Our trip started on the 17th of the month and flying out of Miami to Lima. The following day, we toured some pre-Incan ruins and finished with a shopping trip to Miraflores. On day 3, we flew to Cusco, where we had a lovely accommodation at the Hotel Royal Inca II. We did more tours of ruins, but the accommodation to the high altitude was a challenge for everyone. Coca leaf tea is the traditional remedy, and it really does work. On the 20th of the month was day 4, where various tours of the sites in Cusco were conducted. The morning of the 21st saw us board the narrow gauge train with all of the wonderful sights along the way. The people often appeared in their native costume, and the children were especially delightful. The train arrives at the town of Aguas Calientes, where a bus takes you to a very narrow switchback road trip to the top of the mountain, which is Machu Picchu. Sitting in the bus on the right side and looking out of the window, one can look straight down and see a deep drop off. It seems only inches away, and the bus driver seems completely unaware of that. However, when you get to the top, it's well worth it because you have a scene unfolding before you that is unlike anything that you have seen before. We had a guide, but there was also plenty of free time to explore everything on our own.
One night we all went out and looked for UFOs.
Yes.
And we saw
Yes.
them going in and out of clouds, didn't we?
Yes, yes, they said they would show.
Mhm.
And we stood there for a very, very long time watching and watching. As Michelle's source had stated, the space visitors were frequent in their oversight of the developing civilizations and apparently are still communicating there. You will believe it when you see the Nazca plains coming up on another day. These small stone buildings at the top of the mountain in Machu Picchu had multi-purpose reasons to be there, we are told. And there were no photos taken on the interior that I was able to access or that I took. They were basically all empty. However, there was one incident I remember where one of our group went in and saw the only item that was there in the corner. It was a broom. She immediately walked over and started to sweep the floor with the broom. And Michelle laughed and said that she remembered her job in that other lifetime, where she was the community housekeeper and used a broom then to clean the floor. That first evening, we were able to go back down the mountain and enjoy the healing sulfur springs in the village. Afterwards, some of us enjoyed a few drinks at a tiny bar in our hotel, as well as some talented flute players to entertain us. We completed our tour of Machu Picchu the following day. Back on the narrow gauge railroad to return to Cusco and the lovely Hotel Royal Incan, we continued to tour. A light plane ride over the Nazca Plains was so spectacular. And because I had sat next to the pilot in this little plane, he allowed me to take the controls for a minute or so. We were able to see all of the figures that they advertised, but my camera wasn't good enough to pick them up. But they are very prominent when you look down at them. And then a boat tour to Balestres Island, where we saw sea lions, a few penguins, and many seabirds. We returned to our hotel in Lima, where there was a dinner and a folklore show to finish the trip.
The highlight was that both Dottie and Michelle were on this trip together. I was just overwhelmed with the the beauty of the country and the beauty of the people. I mean, every trip we took was memorable in many different ways. And I think, it was my first entree into taking spiritual journeys, going on spiritual journeys in different countries, and having a intuitive channel with us to pinpoint and expand. And I think that made a world of difference.
And I will say amen to that. Our fourth spiritual mission in 1997 took us to Costa Rica. We were told that it was the most ecologically balanced land in the world. And because of our understanding of the dynamic relationship between the human and the earth and the need for balance there, we were particularly interested in this trip. I found a reference to something that has not been promoted by any spiritual group to this point in time that I am aware of, but Michelle Soar said that it took many millions of years in the preparation of the earth to receive the human race. Our interdependence with this physical planet is not often really appreciated by most of humanity. Many people who have awakened to their spiritual nature have become aware that the planet Earth itself is a consciousness with a great spiritual being known as Gaia, who embodies the earth. The progression of the earth to its own divine destiny is intimately tied to our own. We depend on the nature kingdom, which supports our physical bodies, and in turn, the nature kingdom depends on humans to cultivate and care for the planet in a respectful and nourishing manner. We are so connected that the nature spirits will offset or absorb the dangerous emotional energies that humans cast off, and which could be destructive not only to the earth, but also to the people. The direct relationship of the human emotion to the climate is only spoken of in closed spiritual circles mainly. However, this is a fact and it is true. This is reflected in the reason why we were going to Costa Rica. The increase in anger and other destructive emotions was at such a level that it exceeded the earth spirit's ability to absorb it any longer. Deep under the crust of the earth, at the site of Costa Rica, an apex of movement in the epicenter, which affects earthquake activity, was very active at that time in the late 90s. This apex exists in a more active state than that it should have been. So we went there to calm the magma and prevent a premature triggering of earthquakes affecting both northern and southern hemispheres. These will come to pass in time, however. But before that can happen, humanity has to have the emergence of its spiritual life form first. 3 people on the trip were told that they had been embodied during some very significant earth changes in the past. One saw a severe earthquake in Egypt, which destroyed the temple of the Body Beautiful in Thebes. One had been a Sibyl in ancient Greece and witnessed the final ending of her temple to Athena through earthquakes, which were followed by walls of water. Another was told she had lived several lives, witnessing cataclysmic earth changes as well. All of us were given a short summary of our past and its relationship to the current mission at hand. We were told to both hold the vision of the mission, but also to enjoy the experience. Well, the trip was indeed wonderful. We flew into San Jose, which is a central entry point for every tourist, and spent 2 nights there. The Hotel Almond Park Plaza was beautiful and what you would expect from a first-class hotel. We did a tour around the Capitol and the gardens that surround that area as well. Then the boat tour that we took to Taruga Island was lovely, and the people equally so. We really enjoyed that. And you can see that our group was very healthy and happy as we're showing these pictures here, even though you see Michelle in a picture or two along the way with a medical boot on her one foot due to surgery she had to have for resetting bones in her foot after a fall on a concrete step. Of course, the jungle was the real adventure for most of us. The Monteverde cloud forest was very exciting. We were instructed to look for the exotic birds there, and especially a rare blue one. Throughout our tours of various parts of the jungle areas, we finally did spot one. And they are supposed to be very rare and considered to be sacred. The visit to a butterfly farm was very interesting, and the man who ran it was so excited to share his knowledge with us. We were in an enclosure with hundreds of various kinds of butterflies all around us. Then we transferred to our next lodging, and it was named the Eco Lodge, which was located deep in the jungle at a site where there were several volcanoes. This was the place picked by Spirit to do our ceremony. A perfect clearing with a tremendous solitary rock was chosen. Now, in this elevation and in the rainforest, there was always fog, but the morning we decided to do our ceremony, there was a terrific rainstorm with very high winds. We went down anyway to the site we had selected in our rain ponchos. And it was interesting that we each had a different color, and it almost looked like we planned it that way. But after we gathered around the great rock, joining hands, and we chanted and did many prayers in the driving rain, we completed that and we went back to the hotel or the Eco Lodge and found that we had caused quite a stir among the staff who had been watching out the windows while we were in ceremony. And later on, somebody reported that the one staff member had said to the other, "The witches have come." Well, we took that with a smile because they had no idea who we really were or why we were really there. From there, we journeyed on some of the worst roads imaginable anywhere in the world to the Tabacan Spa. We treated ourselves there to the healing waters and to a massage. Our visit then to Sarchi was a wonderful place to purchase souvenirs and enjoy the sights. As we traveled around throughout this time, we were also told that there were a number of coffee plantations around, and we were able to purchase some very fresh roasted beans to take back with us. Okay, we also, it was an important point as our last place mainly to go, was to the Continental Divide. This is located in Costa Rica on the closer to the Pacific. So we had quite a trip to get there. But when we got there, it was a very amazing experience. The Earth now beneath this area was also involved in the buildup of the magma. And this is an important juncture between the East and West. The Continental Divide extends from the Bering Strait in Alaska to the Strait of Magellan in the southern part of South America, and separates the watersheds that drain into the Pacific Ocean from those river systems that drain into the Atlantic. Obviously, the tectonic plates there are also very important in any earth disturbances. But where we stood, and you can see it in a short video, you can see that the waters, you're standing on a high ridge, and you look to your right, and the waters there from this point on the right are flowing to the Atlantic. And you walked a couple of feet to another part, to like a little rounded area, to the other part of this high overlook. And you look to the left, and all the waters from that point were flowing into the other ocean. So it was a great demonstration of what was going on in the Continental Divide up and down two continents. Now, we had, throughout our trip, hiked on some marvelous trails and really, really felt close to nature. One observation I had in several places where we stayed, that you could hear barking dogs that were roaming the streets at night. And in the morning, very often, a rooster crowed, even in the city. It reminded me of a much earlier time in small towns in the United States where similar sounds could be heard, but not today. And all good things have to come to a close. So we returned to San Jose and the Almond Park Plaza Hotel and departed there for home. Now, on the trip home, Michelle did receive a message from Spirit, and it was reported that we had been entirely successful in our mission. Our final trip in 2003 was to Sedona. It was generated to satisfy the need of the group to get together again on an adventure. We decided to stay in the continental United States, and the one place everyone agreed upon was Sedona. We had all heard of the numerous energy vortices in that area and wanted to experience them. We contacted a guide beforehand for the group who turned out to have a certain amount of psychic ability, which was a very nice match for our group. One of the first sites visited was what is known as the Chapel of the Holy Cross, located close to Arizona and in the Coahuila National Forest. It's an amazing site, and actually now one of the landmarks there. Although it is a Catholic chapel, it has universal appeal. It also has a spectacular view from the parking area surrounding it. Our reason to be there was because of the reports of the vortexes. Our guide was familiar with each and set us out to explore a number of them. And what is a vortex? They are considered to be swirling energies that are conducive to healing, meditation, and self-exploration. These are places where the earth seems especially alive with energy. The vortex and unusual rock formation also have mostly a Native American story connected to it. For instance, the story of Cathedral Rock. The native people believed that Sedona was sacred land and only went there for ceremonies. Only the chiefs and the medicine man were allowed to come to the sacred place. They believed this was the land of the first man and the first woman. If you look at the middle of the Cathedral Rock, you can see the first man and first woman standing back to back. The legend is that the first man and first woman were arguing all the time. They could never agree. Finally, they appealed to the gods for help. So the gods placed them back to back, but together. So they would always have their own views and voice and direction, but yet remain together. A park ranger for the National Forest took us on a tour as well and indicated that the rock paintings that were very prevalent in the area. And again, as with Peru, my camera didn't capture a lot of really good pictures of them. So I put a postcards view of the pictures on the rocks for you to see. Of course, Sedona in the entire area was the home of a number of Native American tribes over time. Because of the lack of a written history, little is known about the earliest peoples of the region. They have been referred to by many names. Anasazi was the name coined by the Navajo people for the earliest peoples, period. The term is roughly translated to the ancient ones. Throughout that region, there were cliffside dwellers, which can be found scattered around the Four Corners area, the whole area, and are so elaborate and well preserved that they rival even the world famous ruins of the Maya and the Inca. After thriving for some 1,000 years, the Anasazi mysteriously disappeared, leaving a few clues of their civilization. And here is one of the rooms that we were able to enter. We did a lot of hiking and touring of the natural environment and enjoyed many restful places along the way. Following our tour there, we went to the Grand Canyon. I don't have a lot of pictures from there, but the famous hotel I thought I would first show you, the original one, and then what we saw when we had our lunch there. This is Grand Canyon's premier lodge known as El Tovar. It opened in 1905 and is a cross between a Swiss chalet inn and a Norwegian villa. It was considered at the time to be the most elegant hotel west of the Mississippi. Today, El Tovar retains its charm and is still one of the most popular lodges. Our view of the Grand Canyon from there was very spectacular, and we really enjoyed the entire experience. From there, we traveled by bus distance north past Flagstaff to a native reservation, which at the time was having a festival celebration. We were also lucky to see some of the ceremonial dances and enjoyed the native crafts that were displayed there, and were certainly able to purchase some of them. We were hosted for the afternoon by a lovely native woman at her home and thoroughly enjoyed that interaction. One of our travelers was lucky to win an elegant Kachina doll, very authentic. We ended our tour back at Sedona and celebrated our last night at a really lovely restaurant known as Joey. There were pictures covering the walls of all the famous people with the name Joe. Our final trip was nostalgically lovely because it reminded everyone of the camaraderie and the connection that our group has with one another. For that reason, it served a great spiritual purpose for going. It allowed us to meditate along the way as a group and have as much fun as any group can possibly experience anywhere in the world. This book will have a sequel because the story of CCWH is more comprehensive than can be put into this portion. We are not just a physical organization, but a spiritual group who has advanced information about humanity's past and how humanity can bring itself to balance today. For this reason, I go back and forth in my storytelling, and I think these are called flashbacks. Starting with 1977, and to refresh your memory, Jimmy Carter was president, the Concorde had its first test flight, the movie Star Wars premiered, peace talks began between Israel and Egypt, and people were listening to songs like Dancing Queen, Margaritaville, and Fleetwood Mac's song, Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow. And on the big picture of humanity's spiritual plan, as seen in the cosmic cycle chart, we were founded in the solar plexus section of that chart. The solar plexus is the great creative manifester. So let's take a look at what brought us here in today's world. 150,000 years ago, a soul group fused with primal man, creating the dual nervous system. The blueprint of Earth was designed to be a synthesis of higher and lower dimensions, and the race of mankind was created to be able to demonstrate that a soul can adapt to the planet and yet at the same time have higher awareness beyond the planet. This is a much longer story, but we need to go to just the last civilization, Atlantis. The original Atlanteans were synthesizers. They had much to create, many things to bring together in order to enact the human experience. After this was accomplished, the opportunity for group entry of space souls created a quantum leap in our evolution. The first wave of space intervention was 60,000 years ago. The second wave of space intervention was 30,000 years ago. It was the second wave at 30,000 years that brought advanced language, transportation, and communication skills. This wave brought on a very advanced, yet very organic social system as well, which almost peaked. However, it did not last. The self-destruction of Atlantis took place about 10,500 BC. How does this tie into today? Well, I think it might be best summed up by giving you this account. The story of Christmas as given to Michelle. Christmas actually started 12,000 years ago when the advanced civilization of that time, Atlantis, destroyed almost half of the earth. This was created through human greed and jealousy. It created the karmic need then to establish a three-stage system of atonement, redemption, and transformation as the payback for this egregious act. People had to learn and demonstrate creativity and light. But it took humanity about 5,000 years to even begin this process. So it was just about 5,000 years ago that a spiritual community high in the Himalayas began. This allowed new souls to enter and the old souls to return if they were willing for atonement and healing. This place was known as the Temple of the Red Dragon, which had as its symbol a dragon to represent the spiritual power that is available to turn over past destruction. This Tibetan community had 3 libraries. It had a hospital, and it had a pharmacy using natural healing elements, and lasted a little short of 1,000 years. Toward the end of that era, astronomy and astrology had been developed as a combined science in the East. Using this technology, a group of pre-scientists saw that the second stage of the recovery plan was about to begin. This was the redemption. Now, just several hundred years prior to the birth of the Redeemer, a highly spiritual and dedicated community was formed in the hills of Judea. They were known as the Essenes. They were spiritually prepared to be the group through whom he was able to be born. So, at the right timing, 4 wise men from the East set on the journey to witness what they saw as the birth of the Messiah. 1 went to Herod's palace to deflect attention from their mission, and the other 3 presented their gifts. Incense to represent that he was of the highest spiritual level, gold to secure his upbringing, and myrrh, the universal salve of healing which had been discovered in the Tibetan community. This was to signify that he would be honored as a great healer. O come, O ye faithful, is the sound of the season. Christ is born. Redemption has happened. And now is the time for personal transformation, which is the message for every child of light. This is the 3rd and final stage. Find it for yourself, because this will bring peace to the world, prevent destruction, and energize goodwill to all mankind. Well, going on with this community story, it was in 1970 that Dr. James La Follette, Michelle's spirit guide, first came through her channel. And it was for my son, who had several physical problems that were unresolved, and he was 3 years old. Dr. La Follette's advice for natural remedies was reminiscent of Edgar Cayce's in his day. By using these natural remedies, as well as the recommended visits to a chiropractor, my son's problems completely resolved within the next 6 months. Michelle was living in Hagerstown, Maryland at that time, and fortunately for me, on that same visit, I met Michelle's identical twin, Dottie Mella. The year following this reading, Michelle moved back to Virginia Beach, and my ongoing connection was with Dottie, who lived locally in Gaithersburg. But I did manage to travel to see Michelle in Virginia Beach. Dottie married and moved to Albuquerque a couple of years later. I moved there for 2 years to study with her. I am aware that Michelle visited Dottie's home frequently to collaborate. Dottie and Michelle's first book in 1975 is entitled The Beginning or the End, Where Are We Going? And was followed by their second book in 1980, The Future's Blueprint. It was following a vision of Swami Sivananda that Michelle moved to the Washington, D.C. area as he had asked and began the organization. It was founded as AMS, the American Metaphysical Society, in 1977. We are placed here to be a light to the nation's capital for the reason that the final stage of the redemptive process for the world body requires much more light energy to be present in this area. In 1982, the name changed to Community Center for Holistic Living, and we held a conference on holism. Dr. Elmer Cranston was one of the panel participants who later founded the American Holistic Medical Association. Early in the organization, Michelle channeled a series of pamphlets called Maps for Health, which contained the outline for most of her teachings, including spiritual psychology, the awakening process, and many others. Many wonderful people gathered around Michelle and attended her many classes on these spiritual topics. How spirit and body interact to create our human experience. Michelle went on to channel and write her creative wellness book in 1987, and Dottie had her own book on color in 1988. But she had created the Sika test long before, in 1972. Michelle and Dottie collaborated on everything. Dottie's knowledge of minerals and gemstones, and by the way, her book is called Stone Power, and her input to the creative wellness book stimulated Michelle to create semi-precious gemstone jewelry all of her life after that. Michelle spent her time teaching spiritual topics, promoting her creative wellness book, and counseling through her gift of channeling. She has done probably 45,000 readings in her lifetime. Meetings were first held in Michelle's home for a number of years before we went on to secure an office space in Herndon. We have had several locations for our chapel services. We were at the Baptist Church in Reston for a number of years, where we were fortunate to find our minister of music, Bob Reed. We eventually went from there to a space in the Reston Community Center after spending a few years at Friends Meeting House in Herndon. We gathered frequently for community get-togethers at all of our locations. In addition to our big trips, we did enjoy traveling locally as a group for other experiences. Perelandra, near Warrenton, is modeled on Findhorn in Scotland, very attuned to cooperation with nature spirits. We also went on lovely retreat to Yogaville and a few other places. We celebrated community a number of times in Howard and Linda Evans' backyard as well, and initially met Reverend Sherry there. Michelle ordained probably 24 ministers through her programs. Emily Smith and Gloria Kauser were very instrumental in that effort with her. They were two of the first ordained, along with General Maxwell, United States Army, retired. Unfortunately, Dottie went on to spirit about 30 years ago. And at that time, we had the sad honor of distributing her ashes in a quickly flowing river, which was her desire. We have only a few pictures here to show of the many who served on the board of directors over time. We had quite a variety of guest speakers at chapel, and here is just a small sampling. In the past dozen years, CCWH have met at the Reston Community Center up to the COVID area and had a number of memorable celebrations there too. As of 2022, CCWH meets only online. We celebrated our 40th anniversary of the founding of CCWH in 2017, and Michelle came from her Virginia Beach retirement to celebrate with us. Sadly, Wilma Donald, the minister who brought Reiki training to us and who was such an extraordinary healer, passed suddenly into spirit just 2 years after that in 2019. We are fortunate to have active members today, like Brenda McGrath, living in San Diego, who has been conducting weekly prayers for peace for the past 4 years. Our Saturday morning program to develop intuition celebrates its 2-year mark now, led by Pastor Mary Huber. More recently, Kelly Baker Wilk, residing in Atlanta, Georgia, a graduate of the 2009 class, has been conducting a weekly distance healing program every Tuesday evening. Our focus on higher-lower balance is more important than ever at this critical juncture in human evolution. Keeping oneself in alignment with the God center of one's being and staying focused on uplifting, positive, creative constructions in mind and emotions are the energies which will allow humanity to make a giant leap forward in spiritual evolution. We are a very active and progressive group of spiritual people who have more to do and more to tell. Please look for our sequel to this memory book. And so it is.